All right, so we're going to begin. Obviously, more people may filter in as the time goes on here, but I don't want to keep you all. Thank you all for coming today. Thanks so much for joining us. As many of you know, my name is Ethan Kaplan. I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. For those of you who don't know me, and I think most of you here do, I'm a teacher and tutor who has more than 13 years of experience and more than 15,000 hours of tutoring experience. I'm also the co-founder of Collegiance, along with my lovely wife, Christine. I'd also like to thank for helping to put all this together, including our very nice slideshow today. I'm joined today by a senior vice president of ACT Inc., Andy Taylor, who's generously agreed to be a part of this. Special thanks to him and to the whole team at ACT for making this possible and for working with us on this. Thank you so much, Andy, also for getting up super early. He's in Arizona, so it is 7 a.m. where he is, so he's dedicated. As I'm sure many of you know, the last few years have really seen a whirlwind of changes in the world of test prep. Since COVID, we've seen test optional policies come and go. We've seen the subject test for the SAT eliminated, and we've seen a bevy of changes to pretty much every standardized test out there, from the GRE to the LSAT to the GMAT to the SAT, and now the ACT. Last year, as I'm sure many of you know, the College Board updated the SAT into its new digital format, and now the ACT is making changes of its own, creating an exam that is shorter, easier to take, and more flexible than pretty much any other test out there. However, like with any other transition, navigating all these changes can be extremely confusing. So we've put together this short talk today to help clarify exactly what the changes are and how both the test and the test prep experience will likely differ from before. We have a really interesting mix of people here today. We have a bunch of parents, we have students, we have a bunch of tutors, we have college advisors. So you have a wide mix of experiences. We do hope that there's going to be something here for everyone. Do note, after we give our presentation about the main test changes, there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. For those of you who know how to use it, there's the Q&A feature here on Zoom. You can just type your questions into that Q&A. At the end of the presentation, we'll try to address as many of those questions as we can. If you really can't figure it out, you can also send me the questions by email, and I will try to present them at the end of the meeting as well. Okay, so let's take it away. So first, just a little bit about me and my organization, and also Andy and his organization. So Collegiance is a test prep and college readiness provider. We've been in business now for not too long, but we're a dedicated small team of expert level tutors. We're specialists in standardized prep tests in particular, exams like the SAT, ACT, LSAT, GMAT, GRE. If it's a combination of letters and it's a test, we probably teach it. We're led by both me and my wife. As for myself, as I mentioned, I'm a tutor with more than 15,000 years of experience. I'm a perfect scorer on the SAT, not the ACT, unfortunately. And I've worked in this industry for over 13 years now, which is making me feel pretty old. And who's the ACT? Well, I think that pretty much goes without saying. I don't think you guys need any introduction. That's why everyone's here. Now, the enhanced ACT is officially here. As of this past weekend, last week, September 6th, that was the first administration of the enhanced ACT on paper for national testing in the United States. There were previous administrations of the exam digitally in April, June, and July in the US, but this is the first time that it was given on paper, which is, at least in our experience, the main way that most students do take the test. This now means that if you're in the United States, with the exception perhaps of some school day testing, if you're taking the ACT going forward, you are taking the enhanced format, regardless of whether you're taking the test on a computer or whether you're taking it on paper. I will note for the international ACT, I did get some questions about this. There was some confusion about this actually last weekend. The international ACT is still technically in the legacy format, but with an optional science section. The enhancements of the other sections of the test, meaning the changes in the timing and the number of questions, that's starting to come next spring, as it will for school day testing in the United States as well. As of now, this also means that the calculation of the composite score on the ACT is officially changed. So for anyone who takes the ACT now and moving forward, their composite score is simply going to be an average of the English, math, and reading scores. With now that the science section is optional and not everyone will necessarily take it, although a lot of you will end up taking it, as we'll talk about later, the composite will just be the average of those three sections. This also means for students who took the ACT previously, and there, I know there's a number of parents here, students here who did perhaps have their children take the ACT both in the prior legacy format and in the new enhanced format. Once you take the test once in the new enhanced format, at least on the ACT website, your super score will be recalculated so that it will just be the average of the English, math, and reading scores. And at least my understanding, if you don't take the enhanced ACT, you just took the legacy test, your super score will not change. So you don't have to worry about that randomly switching overnight or something. That's nothing to be concerned about. But everyone now is on that new super score format once they take the new enhanced test one time. Also, as I mentioned, the science section is now optional. That is obviously probably the biggest overall change to the ACT. It is a separate score that you get on your score report. It's still scored out of 36 like the other sections. It's not like the writing test where it's on a different scoring scale. It is still scored out of 36. It actually goes on pretty much the same place on the score report. The score reports look very similar to the way they did previously, unless there's any new changes that you want to announce to that, Andy. So it'll be on there. The only thing that changes is really, if you don't take it, it'll say not available. And if you do take it, the score will be there, but your composite will just be the average of English, math, and reading. Okay. Andy, if you want to maybe take over from here and just tell a little bit more just about the new test. And also, there's been a lot of misconceptions about this exam, and I think maybe you'd like to address some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ethan. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for spending some Saturday morning time with us. I appreciate it. It's 10 just after 10 a.m. on the East Coast, and I know how busy Saturdays can be for some folks. So as Ethan said, I'm Andy Taylor. Hi. Thanks very much for joining us. I think the first misconception, and I've heard this everywhere in the last year, and I think it could be that our friends at College Board went fully digital. We have not gone fully digital. We're still offering the opportunity to take paper and pencil on a Saturday test. Really, the decision whether to do paper, pencil, or digital really boils down to whoever's paying the bill. And what do I mean by that? So if you're taking a school day test and the district is paying the bill, they get to decide whether it's digital or paper and pencil. And obviously on a Saturday where parents usually are paying the bill for the young person to take the test, you get to decide. Now, that being said, we obviously are working closely with our test centers to decide whether they are going to be a paper and pencil test center, a digital test center, or starting in September, we've also got a bring your own device digital test centers. So it really does depend on your local area, what is supported by the test centers. But we'll continue to support paper, and we certainly have no plans to go away from it. Next one is really, really important. The changes we have made, whilst significant to timing, how long it takes, simplification, etc., but they don't require any new knowledge. So the knowledge base that you know and have been preparing for the legacy ACT does not change. If you are academically prepared for the legacy ACT, you'll be academically prepared for the new ACT. On top of that, we're also not changing the type of question we ask. So our reading questions are still based on reading a passage and then answering some questions about that passage. Our math questions still have all the same question types we had before and are all still multiple choice. So no major changes on content or question types. Why I've used the word major on content is there's some very, very small changes, which Ethan's going to go through later, about how many of each type we have in there, but none of it is new content. It's just changing the sort of percentages of which ones. Fewer question types and adjusted balance across sections. So again, we have fewer questions to work with. So we're bringing that together and having more time, less of those questions. It's actually 44 questions less than it was before. And so, you might think, well, I'm going to get less time per question because it's a shorter exam. Well, no, because we remove 44 of those questions, it actually means that the exam overall is shorter and you'll get more time per question. That isn't an absolute. We haven't spread the peanut butter thinly everywhere with that more time per question. We've actually gone in and made changes by section. So some sections like reading have more time per question, even more time per question in the new format than say something like math. But overall, it's about a 10% increase on the time per question, which is pretty significant, and we think will make a good difference. You know, people always ask us, well, why don't you just make it unlimited time? Well, the speediness, the time is still an important part of the test. We just got a little bit too much on being too quick, too speeded. So we think this readdresses the balance really, really well. And we get to actually be assessing young people's knowledge and skills rather than how quickly they can do a test. Next slide, please, Ethan.
I also just want to jump in and say one thing. Like, I do think that the fact that it is a lot more time per question is going to open up who is going to be able to take the ACT. As I'm sure many of you know, a lot of you, especially tutors and test prep providers, a lot of times the limiting factor for students taking the ACT is timing, especially on sections like reading. And this is going to definitely open up who's going to be able to do very well on this test.
Yeah. So let's talk about some main differences. Let's start with English. So first of all, the passages are slightly shorter. So they are shorter passages. Again, we're trying to help on overall reading load. So again, that can reduce time. However, we are absolutely not going away from the passage with multiple questions format. We are not going to move to the 1 or 2 lines of text, ask a question, different 1 or 2 lines of text, ask a question. Our belief in both English, reading, and science, in all 3 of English, science, and reading is that the passage with multiple questions is the best format and is the most predictable format of college success, which is what the ACT is about. It's making sure you're ready for that college level learning. The next point is something that people may not realize. So this is all questions have STEM. So this means that historically in our legacy ACT, we expected you to do it very in a linear fashion. So you would answer one question and go on to the next question. So that second question may be a follow-on from the first question, but now we'll include a full description, a STEM, so that each question doesn't have to be answered in a linear fashion. It makes sense on its own, and it absolutely stands alone and can be answered in that way. Again, that may seem like a small change, but we're just trying to make sure that students have got all the information they need on paper or on screen at the point at which they're being asked a question. Then math. So the biggest change, and I think it's probably the thing that people immediately see straight away, is that math is now going to be in line with all of the other sections, in that still being multiple choice, it's now just going to have 4 choices per question, not 5. So we've removed one of those incorrect answers. So now math will look exactly the same as the other sections, and we'll do that. That actually, again, should be a time-saving device because, again, there's only 4 questions 4 answers to answer from. The other piece, and this is really important, because we've got fewer questions, and we've changed the balance of the types of questions we're asking, we've removed some of the more foundational math questions. So those questions still exist. They're still part of what we're assessing, but there's going to be fewer of them. So in the total number, what you'll see is it will feel that we're moving to high school math quicker. And hopefully everyone remembers that the math assessment is very much starts more foundational questions and move to higher questions as we move along. You'll make that move quicker because there's fewer questions, and we need to get you to those high school math questions as quickly as we can. And I think that's been a big change for people is, they're used to more of a gentle slope as we go up through the pre-high school math, but now that's a little bit more severe, that slope up to the high school math. Then reading. So again, the passages are slightly shorter. There's going to be a random passage order, and there's because we've got fewer questions overall, there are fewer questions per passage. Again, when I say it's going to be slightly shorter passages, we're not going down to tiny passages. The average length will go down between 50 and 100 words per passage. But again, it's just helping with overall time. And we know that reading load has historically been a big issue on this section and the ACT overall, if we're quite honest with each other. And then finally, excuse me, we've said science is going to be optional from now on. Just a very quick what's happening in there. We'll cover most of that later, but we're seeing a lot of people taking it, and we're going to tell you why in a little while. But now it's going to be 7 passages in the science. And the other thing that we're going to try and fold in within our science areas is we're going to make it a little bit more encompassing. So you're going to see some more what I would call engineering and design topics for the passages. So still science comprehension, still no change there, but we're just going to try and fold in some more extended STEM topics rather than pure science topics. And we think that's important to give that breadth of topic area in that. And just a reminder for everybody, in all of our passages that we use, they are real passages. They come from periodicals. They come from real life. They are not AI created. They are not just created for the assessment. And again, we think that's important because it's about the ACT is about measuring college readiness. So they need to be from the kinds of materials that you'll be expected to read in those first year college classes. And that's really our job. And we'll continue to use real world passages. And I know our teams in our content team, they spend a lot of time finding these passages, and it's a big part of what we do, and we'll continue to do that. And then just there are no differences, but we still have an optional writing assessment, which continues to be very popular, particularly with states and districts. Those of you who live in states that take an ACT as a state requirement, and there's no changes whatsoever to the writing. So no main differences, there are none for writing.
Not on here.
Yeah, exactly. And then we've got the field test. So what does this mean? So a field test are items which are randomly seeded throughout the assessment that are not included in your score. So this is a change. We used to have something called the fifth test, and you'll remember how some people would suggest that you should just put all A's or put all B's or put all C's, but we did ask you to do it properly because it helps us create content for the future. And because of all the things we know, and people were too aware that this was not part of their score, what we've done instead is remove that fifth test. And instead now, a small number of the items throughout the test will be seeded items that will not count. However, the student will not know which those items are scored and which are not scored. So please don't try and guess. Instead, they'll just be in there, and just the simple point is that not every item counts towards your final score, but there is no system. There is no every third question or anything like that. So they are in there. Just be aware that not every item counts towards your score, and some are what we call field test questions. Thanks, Ethan. So next is the next big difference, and the thing that we're most really important for us is timing. So English is now going to be just 50 questions in 35 minutes, which Ethan's done the math for us, 0.7 of a minute per question. Whereas before, you'll remember, it was 75 questions in 45 minutes. So 10 minutes less, but 25 questions less. So a third less of the questions, 66.7% of the total questions that you were doing before, but only a reduction of, and that's going to be tough to do the math, 9, yeah. So that's a 22% or so reduction in time. So, we have increased that time per question, which is important. So about, 1/7 of 0.7 per minute and now 0.6 per minute per question. So again, slightly more time, slight reduction in the reading load as well. So overall, the student should feel that they have more time. And in the studies we've done prior to going live and in April, June, and July, there was that feeling from students there was a bit more time. I know that Ethan's going to share some feedback from this weekend, but we've been studying this for about 2 years, and generally students are telling us they are feeling that timing difference. So then looking next at math, math used to be 50 minutes and 45 questions in that time. Excuse me, no, it is now 50 minutes and 45 questions in that time. Math used to be the easiest to work out. It used to be 60 minutes for 60 questions, 1 minute per question. And now we've obviously got just over a minute at 1.1 minutes. So simple math there, a 10% increase. Again, as I said, although there are not more questions on high school of the high school level math, because that number is has stayed pretty static, yet the total number of questions have come down. We have had some feedback from some students that it felt like there were more of the higher the higher level questions for math, but they're not. They're just the same number, but it just feels because they're the same number in a less total, it feels like there's more of them. So that's certainly the immediate feedback we've had. But again, if you are ready academically for the previous one, you'll absolutely be ready academically for this one. Next, we'll take a look at reading. So reading, 35 minutes for 40 questions, just under a minute per question. We've now really bumped that up to over 1.1 minutes per question. This is where we made the biggest gains, if you like. So, went from under a minute to well over a minute, nearly a 20% swing there. And we thought that was where we should put the investment, if that makes sense to everybody. Most of our students say that the reading is the one they struggle with from a time perspective. So that's where we put the investment. And we think that's the right thing to do. And then finally, science. Science, we've kept the same number of questions. So still 40 questions. As we said earlier, similar format, doesn't really change there. But we've just given 5 minutes total more time, which brings us up, brings us up about 11% and puts us at exactly a minute per question. So science becomes the easiest one to work out now, a minute a question, and we've done that. As you can see, the significant investment of that time that we bought ourselves with the new blueprint, we've invested into reading, and because we think that's the one that historically people struggle to finish with. And just a note here, a lot of these timing studies, we don't stand over a student with a stop clock. A lot of these timing studies are really supported by those students taking the digital assessment, because we're able to really see what's happening on those questions. We can see how long a student is taking on those questions. We can see if a student is just going in and clicking an answer at random. We have a specific rule that says if a student takes 5 seconds or less to answer a question, we know that's a guess. We consider that a guess. They haven't really thought about it in time. So our aim is for students to get to the end and to reduce those number of guesses. That's really all of our aim. We want students to finish and finish within time, having had the chance to answer every question. And then writing, as I said, no change. So then let's talk about field test questions. So there are a small number, 10 in English, 4 in maths, 9 in reading, and 6 in science, and of questions that will not be scored. And these will be seeded throughout the assessment. And again, we would highly advise students try not to guess which ones are which, that they're going to be seeded. Take the best the best way you can at everyone, and that will really help. From a if you're interested from a psychometric perspective, it's really important for us to do this, and long term it will actually help us get scores out quicker, because long term this will mean that we won't have to do some of the back end psychometrics. They'll be done properly and well ahead for us. So anyway, going back to where these are, for English, reading, and science, it's going to be one whole passage, possibly 2 on English, but it will not count. And again, it will move. So don't assume that it's always the same one. So when you get the My Answer key back in October, don't go, well, that's where it was in October, therefore that's where it will be in future. That's not the case. We will be moving it. This little inside baseball here, first and last passages will always count. So if you want to get super detailed. You could suggest that students do the first passage first and the last passage second, and then move on to the other three. But that may not. Again, we will stick to what we have said and not make the first and last passage. But within the other passages, it will change. And in fact, I know for a certain it is changing, because October is different to December, different to September, and so on and so forth. And then interesting thing, can it lead to harsher scales? The scaling, it's still early to tell. It could. I think Ethan's put will probably hit. We'll see.
That's my
Slight language difference, but no, it's fair. And Ethan's just sharing what he and his students have seen and what they think. We'll wait and see. Our aim is to really continue to be correct in testing and to test the same things. Three things that are really important to us. When we started this project a number of years ago, this has taken us a number of years. When we started this project a number of years ago, there were three things that were very important to us. One, we did not want to change the predictability. The how successful are you going to be in your first year at college? That's what the ACT was all about in the first place. Measuring how successful you're going to be at college. And we have a wealth of information that tells us that. We didn't want that to change. We didn't want to get into we've seen a pit that some GPA, for example, has had that, and other measures of college readiness have seen a change where the scores have gone up in those areas, but actually the college readiness has remained the same or even decreased in other instances. We didn't want that to happen. Secondly, we didn't want the scales to change. We didn't want for our friends and colleagues in higher ed, we didn't want them to say, oh, when did they take the ACT? Do I have to use the old scale, the new scale? We wanted a 25 to mean a 25. We wanted a 32 to mean a 32. So that was very important for us. And then thirdly was the timing piece that I've already mentioned. We wanted to improve the timing. So those three tenements were really core to everything we did. And so far we've kept to those, and all of the thousands of students that took this in the background, took this as studies, and took this as outside of the normal cadence. We've kept to those three tenements. So things like scaling and others, we'll see, but we're hoping there won't be too much of an impact. But it's a fair comment from Ethan and others.
I do just want to say also, from because I've had students take the digital test and would also the enhanced test. They took it digitally in April, June, and July, and they also had taken the legacy test previously. I would note a lot of tutors here who have used the new official guide. The scales in that book are extremely harsh, and I think that is partially due to the lower number of questions. I will note from my students who took those tests, because they do show you still how many questions you got right and wrong in each category, the scales were not nearly as harsh on the actual test, the actual enhanced ACTs in April and June, as they are in that big official guide right now, at least for those first couple of administrations. I did note that.
Thank you. I think it's you now, isn't it?
This is me, yes. All right, so let's go through into a little bit of a deep dive into what the actual changes are in the different sections of the test. Andy, of course, has gone through most of those big picture changes, but I'm just going to go through with you a little bit more detail from the test framework. So for the English section now, as many of you know, the old test, the legacy ACT, had 5 passages with 15 questions each on them. The new test is moving towards shorter passages. The English section is going to be moving to either 6 or 7 passages. It actually will depend on which ones are the field test questions. So you'll either have 4 passages with 10 questions and 2 with 5 questions, in which case one of the 10 question passages will not count, or you will have 3 passages with 10 questions and 4 with 5 questions, in which case 2 of the 5 question passages will not count. So you can't assume the field test questions are always from a 10 question passage. It could also be from a 5 question one, which makes sense that they don't want to make it that predictable. In terms of the balance of questions, and this is definitely something that we've been hearing from students who took the tests both in the spring and also who took it this past weekend. There is less grammar and punctuation on the section. if you look at the overall numbers of questions on the section, previously conventions of standard English, which is essentially questions about punctuation and usage, those questions previously made up around 55% of the questions. That is now moving to under 50%, around 40%, I believe, under the new framework. And then also, just because the overall number of questions is significantly fewer, that means the actual raw number of punctuation and grammar questions is lower, significantly lower. And also the proportion of them is lower as well. So proportionally, the English section is going to be a little bit less, punctuation and grammar heavy. In terms of how that's going to affect how people prepare for it and also how students perform on it, most students don't like punctuation too much, but it is something that is very learnable, something that a lot of tutors like myself like to focus on in a lot of depth because students can see rapid increases on that. That's still going to be important. It's still 40% of the questions on the section, but it's not going to be as big of a portion of it. So there are going to be a higher proportion of more reading-based questions and questions on diction and word choice as well. There's also a few question types that have been straight up removed from the English section. So actually following what the SAT also has done, idioms are no longer being tested on the English, which I am very thankful for. Some of you know I used to teach English in Hong Kong, where I used to live. And teaching idioms to students who are not native speakers is extraordinarily difficult because they say, they ask, why is this idiom the way it is? And I don't have a reason for it. It just, that's the convention. So those idioms have been removed. Andy probably speak more to this, but I think that is partially because it's a little unfair to, people who don't come from the US, but those are gone. They've also removed a few other questions. Paragraph ordering, which was pretty uncommon anyway on the test, has been officially nixed. There are still sentence ordering questions. You still have to, put stuff in order, but you just no longer have to move entire paragraphs. And also, there are no more of these questions where they're asking what is the least acceptable option or what is a not acceptable option. That also, at least according to the test framework for now, is no longer on the English section. I know a lot of students in the past have missed those questions in part because they just didn't read them. They just sometimes picked the one that was acceptable. So those are thankfully gone. And as Andy said, every question on the English section will now have a stem, which just means there's an actual question, right? So it's no longer just no change and then pick from among three alternatives. Sometimes it'll be as simple as which choice is most grammatically acceptable. In fact, a lot of questions will just say that. In that case, having the stem there doesn't really change the experience of the question at all. But there are a few questions that are going to get significantly easier. For instance, questions about like eliminating redundancy. Previously, sometimes students had to notice for themselves, oh yeah, this answer is a lot shorter than the other ones. These other ones are kind of saying the same thing that we previously said. So it's that shorter, more concise, less redundant answer that's correct. They had to recognize it themselves. And they could have been confused that maybe the question was testing something different. Now the question is going to be very clear, which choice is least redundant in context. So you'll have a better idea of what exactly to look for. So I think specifically questions about what's called like knowledge of language, which are mostly about diction and word choice. I think those specifically are going to get a little bit easier, not significantly. It's only a couple of questions in there. So there's a few. For the other ones, the overall experience shouldn't be too different. Many of the reading-based questions before already had stems on them, and the stems that they're adding to the grammar and punctuation questions, again, are just saying what's the most grammatically acceptable, which won't really fundamentally change too much. Okay. All right, going into the math. Oh, and also, as Andy said, first and last passages do always count according to the test framework. So that's the only thing other than that, as Andy said, there is no reason to try to start analyzing passages 2 through 5 and saying, well, probably this one counts and this one doesn't, and counting up how many narrative passages or informational. Don't do that. It's not going to be helpful. All right. So then for the math section. So the math section, as Andy noted, there is significantly less pre-high school math, what's called integrating essential skills questions on the section. Just in terms of some raw numbers on the old test, the legacy ACT, there were around 24 integrating essential skills questions and 36 roughly called preparing for higher math questions, which were the high school level math questions. So it was 40% of those more foundational questions and 60% of those high school level questions. On the new test, those numbers have gone down significantly. In terms of the number of scored questions in each of those categories, there are now 8 questions on integrating essential skills. So going from 24 down to 8, 1/3. And the preparing for higher math questions, although there's still 36 of them roughly overall, 33 of them will count. So almost the exact same, in fact, the exact same number of those questions. A few of them won't count, but it's the exact same number of the actual high school level math questions, but it's now making up 80% of the section instead of 20% versus on the previous one where it was 60% of the section. So the difficulty will definitely ramp up a lot more quickly on the section, and there'll just be fewer, gimme questions at the beginning of the test. I think I already said that. One other notable change, which was actually buried in the test framework, which I have gone through all 200 plus pages of, a little buried in there. So that on the previous version of the test, I actually didn't even know this till I went through the test framework, but there were 6 questions on the legacy ACT that were considered beyond grade level, the most advanced math questions. On the newer test, they actually have reduced that down to 3. So what we're going to see most likely on the math section, and this, I think I've been hearing this from students who took the test this past weekend, is overall the difficulty level is going to feel higher because you're going to have fewer of those easy questions on it. You're going to have a lot more medium, hard, and hard questions on it, but then you are going to have slightly fewer of those crazy complicated ones at the end. So they are removing a lot of the easy ones, but they're also removing a few of the hardest ones as well, which I think is good. As Andy mentioned, there's 4 answer choices per question. That might affect timing a little bit. I did note in the test framework that they said that the answer choice that they're trying to remove was the least likely one. So I guess that may not change too much in terms of the timing, but it does mean if you're using some common test taking strategies like plugging the answer choices into the question or using the process of elimination, those might go a little bit more quickly. And also, there's no more grouped questions on the test. Now, actually, at least according to the test framework, I had not noticed this, but apparently those have been removed even before the enhanced ACT. They've been removed apparently in recent years, even on the legacy test. But this means you're no longer going to have any questions that are all based on a common piece of information where they say, questions 38 to 41 are based on this info. And they tended to have kind of a big chunk of text that you had to read and analyze for a couple of questions. All questions are now discrete and standalone on the section. Going into the reading section, as Andy mentioned before, the order of the passages is no longer fixed. So on the ACT, going back from 1996 or maybe even earlier, because that's the earliest test I've seen, up until 2024, we always had prose fiction or literary narrative, social science, humanities, natural science. I know we're all used to it. Maybe it's kind of ingrained in our heads, but that is, for better or worse, starting to change. So the order of the passages is no longer fixed. I had students who took the test this past weekend who had a science passage first and had a literary narrative last. You can have 2 literary narratives now. It's not necessarily just one of them anymore. So some of the, some students before would kind of go through the reading section knowing which passages they wanted to do first. Sometimes students would be like, oh, I know I don't like science, so I'm going to save science for last. Or I know literary narratives give me trouble, so I'm going to skip passage 1 and come back to it later. Can't really do that anymore because you don't know exactly where things are going to be located. Also, this is a change that they started to make a little bit on the legacy ACT already in recent years, but the social science, humanities, and natural science passages are no longer going to be labeled as such. They will just be labeled informational now, which we already saw on a couple of legacy ACTs as well. But that just means you're not going to be able to identify, at least from the blurb at the top, which specific nonfiction passage type you're dealing with. It'll either say literary narrative or informational only. In terms of the scored passages on every reading section, so 3 of the 4 passages do count. 1 of the scored passages will be a literary narrative, and 2 of them will be informational. So that does mean if you see 2 literary narratives on the section, 1 of them doesn't count. If you see 3 informational passages on the section, 1 of them doesn't count. It is always those numbers that are scored. And then you have an extra field test passage, which will either be a second literary narrative or a third informational passage that will not count towards your final score. Now, among the scored passages on the section, Andy alluded to the fact that the reading is getting a little bit, some of the passages are getting a little bit shorter. Now, actually, the way that's primarily happening is it's not that all of the passages are getting shorter, it's that one of them is getting shorter. And then on average, the whole section gets a little bit shorter overall. So these numbers are, they don't have like an exact word count. The passage must be this exact number. It's a ballpark. But among the scored passages, you'll have one standard 750 word long passage. You'll have one slightly shorter 650 word long passage. And then your third scored passage will be either a paired passage or a passage that has some kind of graph or table or figure on it. Okay, so one or the other is scored on the test. That means if you do have both a paired passage and a passage with a graph, a table, or a figure on it, only one of them counts towards your final score. Also, for those passages with graphs, tables, and figures, I think this kind of sort of obvious, those are not ever going to be literary narratives. I don't really know how you would put a graph on a short story or something anyway, but those are always on informational texts. The paired passages can still be either literary narratives or informational texts. And also, as Andy mentioned, it is now 9 questions per passage instead of 10, which will make it overall easier to finish. For the science section, I mean, the changes are pretty minor, I would say, on this section. Biggest thing is that there's 7 passages in it instead of 6. This is actually a return to the old format of the ACT. In 2014 and earlier, there were 7 passages, so it's just kind of going back to that. Still, same number of questions overall, just fewer questions per passage. As Andy mentioned, at least one of the scored passages is going to include some kind of engineering concepts. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be a standalone engineering passage, just that there will be some kind of engineering concepts mentioned or tested within that passage. Concepts like prototyping, I know, was specifically mentioned in the test framework as something that they can ask about. So that will be on there. Also, there will be a slightly higher number of questions requiring background knowledge. Now, the overall numbers are actually almost exactly the same. According to the test framework, 5 to 8 questions on the new exam will require some kind of background knowledge, while on the older test, only 4 to 8 of the questions required background knowledge. But remember, this is out of a different number of scored questions. So this is 5 to 8 out of 34 scored questions versus 4 to 8 out of 40 scored questions. And of the scored passages on the test, it's actually the exact same number as on the legacy ACT. 3 research summaries, 2 data representation passages, 1 conflicting viewpoints passage. For those tutors among you, you know what those passages are. For parents, I won't bore you with the details of what those are. And then the additional passage will just be an extra of one of these categories. At least in the official prep guide, on every single one of the tests, the extra passage was a research summary. I don't think that's guaranteed on the test, almost certainly not, but that was, at least true among the tests in that guide. And it is notable, the field test passage will always have exactly 6 questions on it. So again, I wouldn't recommend, as Andy said, trying to figure out which passage is scored. But if the passage doesn't have 6 questions on it, it's definitely scored. So, you do know that based on the test framework. All right, now as for the science section, a lot of people have asked me, who needs to take the science section? Well, the science section is still very popular. Among all my students that I have currently taking the ACT, I think only one of them is choosing to not take the science section. And that's not because I didn't recommend it, but because she's very, very resistant to it. Now, the science section is required only at 2 schools in the country. And those are currently Pomona College and Boston University. If you want to apply to Pomona College or Boston University and you want to submit an ACT score, take the science section. It's worth noting those schools are test optional. So it's kind of weird. We're test optional, but if you take the test, you got to take this section. I don't know who's in their admission office making that decision, but that's what they've said. Also, among a few schools, including notably Duke, Michigan State, and Rochester Institute of Technology, they are also recommending the science section. So they're recommending that people do it. But at every other school, it is optional. And at a few schools, they actually say that it's not considered. One that actually I found kind of shocking, Georgia Tech, which I would have thought is a big STEM school, said that they will not consider the science section, which is odd, but that's what their policy is. Um, Now, note, if you do take the test and you want to delete your score, a lot of you may not know or may know that you can delete ACT scores after the fact. If you want to delete your test score, though, you have to delete the entire score, not just the science section. So do note, if you take the science section, it is there. It is going to be part of your score report, and it will remain on your ACT super score report as well if you've taken the science section one time. The super score report will show your highest science score. However, the Common App, which did release its new version in early August, does allow you to omit your science score from your test if you don't want to include it. So even if you take the science section, it will be there on your ACT account. It will be on any official super score report that you send out to schools. So for a school like Georgetown that requires those official, score reports, they will see it. But most schools, which just accept self-reporting and then verification after admission through the Common App, those schools, if you don't want to send your science score, you can choose not to. It just literally asks, do you want to include a science score? They didn't ask, did you take the science section? So there's very little risk to taking the science section because you could choose to just not include it. So that's why we're usually recommending students do it right now, because it's something that if you do well, it can help you. And if you don't do well and you're not applying to Georgetown, then oh well, don't include it in your score. So most people, I think, are taking it.
Ethan, can I just add a little bit of again inside baseball for folks? You mentioned that on school day testing, we're going to the new blueprint in spring. School day testing is on a window rather than a specific day. That's why we talk about a season rather than a day or a date or a month. And most of the states that we work with that are going to be going to the new blueprint are keeping science. So most of the school day testing experiences you'll see will still include science because remember, as I said at the start, that choice is by whoever pays the bill. So it's going to be the top. So just thought I'd add that tidbit in there.
And in terms of maybe, and if you want to just talk about some of the digital ACT enhancements that are coming.
Yeah, of course I can. So again, it's not required that you take a digital experience. Paper and pencil is still there, but we want to give as much choice as we can. So the first thing that I think we're really excited about, and we did this in September for the first time, in April, June, and July when we offered the digital test, and previously to that, it was on what we call a school managed device, so a device owned by the school. So for those of us at a certain age, it was done in computer labs, which are slowly disappearing from our schools with students having their own devices or the school just giving devices. Those computer labs are slowly disappearing. So what we did a big pilot just now in September where people could bring their own devices. So very similar to those of you that know the SAT and their Blue Book, and very much what they call Blue Book, we call Gateway. So this is an app that runs and makes sure that your machine has got the right technology in it. And it also shuts down the browser and other functions during the test. So it shuts down all access to USB ports. It shuts down browser to any other site. So really that machine can then, we know for sure from a test security perspective, that's a good machine. We will still have that school provided devices testing, and that will continue to be a choice. So when you sign up, you'll be given a choice between bring your own device or provided digital or paper and pencil. So more choices, science optional, writing optional, how you do it. So lots of choices to be made, but we'll still continue to do that. And the reason for that is most of our test sites are high schools, and some of those high schools don't want third-party devices on their network. So they're going to continue to provide the devices. And just sort of hot off the press here, we are working closely with our friends at Desmos and our friends at PSI to make sure the Desmos calculator will be included in there. Desmos is already available on school day testing, those that do it digitally, but we want to add that towards that. And just actually, while I've got the group here, we're really excited that in the next few weeks, we're going to be announcing a partnership with Desmos and Texas Instruments, because we know that many people still use the handhelds. And we're really going to be providing more information on how to maximize those calculators during the assessment. So some nice videos on how to do that, some ways of working, etc., etc. So really excited by that, and give me a chance to announce a new partnership that's on its way. Thanks, Ethan.
All right. So in terms of the existing materials that we have available for practicing for the this new enhanced ACT, so we do have one free enhanced ACT in this new format that is available. This is on the ACT website as the Preparing for the ACT 2025 to 2026 exam. This exam is also available on digitally if you want to take it in the computer format. And that same exam is available in the official ACT prep guide. It is the first practice test in that book. That test, I will note, is a conversion of a legacy ACT. It is converted to be in the new format, but it is worth noting it is a conversion. So I know there have been students I see also in the Q&A here, some people asking when are we going to see more realistic materials available. It is worth noting those tests in that book are conversions of legacy ACTs. They're not tests that were built from the ground up in the new enhanced ACT format, but they are still useful. They're still real ACT questions. They still have a lot of the same question types or all the same question types in them. But it is worth taking them with a little bit of a grain of salt. The legacy ACTs that we have are still useful, even the ones that are not converted into the new format by ACT or by Wiley. The other ACTs in the legacy format are still useful because they test the exact same concepts, but you do want to modify the way that you utilize them in order to match the new format of the test. So that's what I wanted to talk about just in the next two slides. So there's kind of two ways that you can use legacy ACTs in your prep work together, in your prep work with students, or if you're a student in your studies. The first is what I call scaling the test up. Basically, this is just taking a legacy ACT and just changing it so you have the exact same amount of time per question as you would on the updated test without changing like which questions you answer or the number of questions you answer. This is very simple. All you do is instead of doing 45 minutes, 60 minutes, 35 minutes, and 35 minutes for the 4 sections of the test, you just do each section in 53 minutes, 66 minutes, 44 minutes, and 40 minutes. That is roughly, there's some rounding there, but that roughly gives you the exact same amount of time per question as you would have on the new ACT. The benefit of this, the downside of this is that this will actually make the test even longer. Right? The enhanced ACT is supposed to be shorter. This will actually make a legacy ACT even longer. So that's obviously not super great, but that's what you have to do. The benefit to this is you'll have reliable and easy to apply score scales, and it doesn't really require any legwork to do it. You just use a different timer, right? The other way that you can also do this is to use the legacy test is to scale them down a bit. Now, the way that this works is for the English section, just do the first 50 questions on the section. That's going to mean you're doing 3 full 15-question passages and just do the first 5 questions from the 4th passage and do that in 35 minutes. I just realized there's a typo there. Then for math, to simulate the fact that you're going to have fewer of those easier questions on the test, just start with question number 16 and just go straight up to the end, up to question 60, and do that in 50 minutes, just as you would on the updated test. For reading, you would skip the final question of each passage to simulate the fact that there's 9 questions per passage. Or if it's a paired passage, you should actually skip the first question. The reason for that is the last question is always one of the compare and contrast questions, and you don't want to be cutting those because there's always like 3 of them pretty much on every passage. So you want to leave that. So just cut out the first question on those and give yourself 40 minutes total. And for science, just try to use a test in that pre-2014 format, and it's the same exact test. And you can give yourself the full 40 minutes to do that. So this would not be, factoring in the field test passages. I don't think there's any real good way to do that. It would be using, every question and scoring it. But this would match the timing of the new test overall and kind of simulate some elements of the test day experience. What you would then do is take your raw score on each of these questions that you've done and use these little multiples here. English, you multiply by 3/2. Math, you multiply by 4/3. Reading, you multiply by 10/9. And science, you don't multiply at all. And you could just look at the scale and find the equivalent score. And that is actually what I've been doing with a lot of my students to try to simulate the timing of the test. I promise you the math works out on these numbers over here. So those are just some ways that you can utilize existing materials. But there are also some new materials coming. Andy, maybe you can speak about here.
Absolutely, I can. Oh, yeah, I am still on. I thought I was on mute, but I'm not. So first of all, a full new practice test will be available in October 2025. We'll share that in various channels, but that will be available, and literally the team are working on it right now. We're also putting a plan together to put multiple more practice tests and more details on that soon. We know that is a miss on our part. Let's be honest about it. We have not issued enough practice tests, and we know that, and we appreciate that, and we're working as hard as we can to fix that as much as we can. We've had a number of questions in the chat about this, and we know it's not there. So yeah, thank you, Ethan. It's not a conversion. This is a completely new test form. We'll be getting that out, and again, we'll be doing the same. As soon as we've released the My Answer Key, and really pleased that everybody's calling it My Answer Key, not TIR. I can't help myself. I keep using the term TIR. But that will be released in October, and then that obviously will give us a live form that was used by many people, and we'll look to use that for some of those additional purposes, as well as what we're releasing. Our aim is to get to, you know, a number of forms out there for people to use, as well as additional forms in the new Red Book, additional forms in the Kaplan product, and additional items that we share with our friends and colleagues in NTPA. Which then again, those items are older items, but at least we're trying to add as much as we can out there. I think there was a question. I think you answered, Ethan, but just to make it audible to everybody, My Answer Key will come out a couple of weeks after the results. The reason for that is not all results are released on the same day. We try and release results as we have sort of packages of them. And what we need to do is we need to get to a very high percentage of results released before the My Answer Key goes out, just in case there's an issue, whether it's a big or anything else. So that's why you see a couple of weeks delay. The new editions of the official guides, we're hoping to be out by the end of the year. We're working closely with our colleagues at Wiley. You'll remember that these are sort of supplemental to the big Red Book, and they're separate subject guides that can be purchased if that's what you want to do. And again, we don't have an exact date on those, but we're working as hard as we can to get that date out and shared as much as we can. Again, we understand that we've not maybe hit the mark on all of these test prep things, but we're working hard to catch up and make sure that we'll have that as soon as we possibly can. And then finally, we have discussed potentially creating an item bank. That's with our tech folks and understanding how that would work. But we'll share more information as soon as we have it on there. And that's similar to others that have item banks and can do that. If there's any test prep organizations that want a little bit more information, we'll work with our friends and colleagues at NTPA to share that through them and make sure that information, as soon as we have it, is with you guys.
I know we're at 11 here. I'll just very briefly try to get good feedback, because I know Benny needs to go. So just from what we've heard from students who have taken the test both this past weekend and who took the, when the test was digital only in April, June, and July. So the English section, universally, I've heard from students that it has felt easier overall, a lot easier to finish, more time per question. A lot of people have noted that there was a lot less punctuation on it and that there were more reading-based questions on the section, which is completely in line with the test framework. And as I mentioned, although the scales in the Big Red Book are quite harsh on English, haven't really seen that with the students who have taken it so far, at least from, obviously September hasn't been released yet, but from April, June, and July, the scales seemed, fairly normal. For math, everyone has said the math felt very hard. I know a lot of test prep folks out there have probably been hearing for years, for everyone taking the ACT for maybe the last 5 years, our students have been coming out of the exam saying the math was the hardest math ever. So this is not new. There has been a notable increase in the difficulty of the math section just in recent years, but definitely people who came out of the math section of this enhanced ACT said that it felt harder because there were fewer of those easy questions on it. Some people even said that they didn't even feel like there was a difficulty order. They thought it was just like jumping right into the hard questions. To my understanding, there still is a difficulty order, but it just is jumping into the harder stuff a little bit earlier. And then for reading, again, this was, I think, the section that has gotten the most positive feedback. Everyone has just thought it's just so much easier to finish now. I mean, I can share also, I had a student who never scored above a 25 on reading on the legacy ACT, got a 32 on the reading on the enhanced one because she just couldn't finish the test previously. It wasn't that she was a bad reader, she just couldn't finish it. So that is definitely going to help students like that. And also for students who did get those passages that have graphs and tables on them, and there have been some of those on the legacy test as well, students said it felt very similar to the types of questions they saw even on the science section. So it wasn't really, all that jarring, even though, again, there's not really many, there's only one official passage in that format available right now. Students still felt like by preparing for science, they kind of were already prepared for a passage like that. And then for the students that took science, people basically said they barely even noticed a change on the section. They just thought that having 5 extra minutes was nice. No one specifically noted any difference in the types of passages or anything about more background knowledge being needed. No one reported anything like that to me whatsoever. So it seems like the science section really is just a slightly easier to finish version of the science test that we saw before. Okay. So I know it's after 11 here. Andy, if you need to go, it's okay. I do want to give a chance to answer some questions just because I know you guys all had some. Sorry, we went a little bit long. We were having fun, so sometimes we go a little late. So I answered some of the questions in the Q&A already. I think some of these
I've just done the same, Ethan.
Yeah, I think some of these questions we've already addressed. Some people were asking about, more reliable practice materials being released. Again, we're going to get that new form in October. We're going to get those the new official subject guides coming up, hopefully fairly soon, and other new tests getting released. So that will come with time. I mean, with any new exam, this was true when the SAT switched over too. You had 4 practice tests for a year, and then you start getting more. So that will come with time, but should start to come, I think, next month. Someone asked about how the red book, the field test questions were sometimes in the first and the last passages. I don't know, Andy, if you want to address that.
Yeah, no, I'll be honest, I wasn't aware of that, and let me just, and I should have been aware, and I wasn't. So my apologies to everybody. I've actually just on the side while Ethan was talking, dropped a note to our product manager who owns our test prep materials, including our relationship with Wiley. Her name's Laurie, and said, "Hey, Laurie, we need to make sure that we follow these." And I've sent all the feedback that was in the questions plus what I've heard about the red book, so she's aware, and we'll make sure that's in our meetings. They actually start, the new edition meetings start next week, believe it or not. So it takes a long time to prepare. So it ends up going to the printer usually in March. So it takes us about 6 months preparation time to get that far. So yeah, all that feedback is in there. It's in the agenda for those conversations. So thank you for that.
Then someone asked also, maybe Andy, you can address, are there going to be practice tests on Gateway similar to Blue Book, or are the practice tests just going to remain on the website?
Good question. No final answer on that one yet. It's something we've been looking at. We obviously, what I will say is that if they end up on Gateway, that would not be the only place they would be, because again, we want to make sure that there is access for all, not just those that are bringing their own devices. And Gateway is only used by those that are bringing their own devices. And because that's not the only way of taking our test, unlike Blue Book, which is kind of the only way of taking the test, we want to make sure they're available. So the answer is we're not 100% sure yet, but what we are sure on, it will not exclusively be on Gateway. So there will be other ways to access that test. Even as far as PDFs of preparing for the ACT will always have a sample test in it, and there will always be an opportunity to print that out and send that out. And in fact, we've in fact printed out and sent out to some of our access partners that need that, and we obviously offer that in alternative accommodated processes as well. So maybe, but it won't be exclusively on there, is the answer on that one, Ethan.
Okay. And then someone mentioned if you use my method for scaling the test down, that the Scantron is off. Yes, don't use a Scantron. Just circle it in the book. You'll be able to...
That's yours, Ethan. I can't answer that one.
we got to do what we can do on that one. I'm not going to come up with a new Scantron. If some tutor among you wants to create a new Scantron for that, go for it. But I'm not. I'm pretty hardworking. I don't think I'm that hardworking. um, Eric also asked about whether I can print those fractions. I will share the slides actually with everyone. So that raw score conversion, if you're using that method, that'll be in the slides that I'll share with you. So you can, I'll give it to you there. Someone else asked about how students can technically decide whether or not to share their science scores. So I can answer this at least from the Common App. The Common App gives you an option. It says, what was your highest ACT score? Composite. What date did you achieve it? What was your highest English score? What date did you achieve it? What was your highest math score? What date did you achieve it? What was your highest reading score? What date did you achieve it? Do you want to submit a science score? Do you want to submit a writing score? So you can choose on the Common App, even if you've taken the science section, whether or not to include it. However, because that standardized testing portion of the Common App is not school specific, it is in like the big profile that you're submitting. If you choose to not submit the science score to one school, you are not submitting the science score to all schools. So that is worth noting. So maybe BU is going to get less popular this year or something. I don't know. But you have to, at least with the Common App, it's either you send it to everyone or you send it to no one. On the ACT Super Score report, once you've taken the science section, it's on there. You cannot remove it unless that whole test state was deleted, right? As long as there is an existing science score, it will be on the Super Score report no matter what. And I also just want to note, like, there are some questions about how how super scoring is going to work with people who've taken the old test and the new test. So on the ACT website, if you take the new test once, the science is no longer factored into your super score on the ACT website. How schools choose to do it, it's up to
That's
them,
right.
It's completely up to them. They could choose to say, hey, we're just using English, math, and reading no matter what, even if you do submit a science score. If they choose to do that, they could use the sum of the scores or something. They could choose to do that. It's completely up to the schools. And
Ethan, just on that point, there have been some schools that for years have done their own calculations.
Yeah.
So, for example, we have some schools that calculate their own ELA score, which is just reading plus English. Now, our ELA score is English, reading, and writing. You need to have done writing to get an ELA score. And we don't believe that a true ELA score wouldn't have writing in it, but some schools do that. And some schools, to your point, have historically calculated their own scores, so they feel that they can match ourselves and SAT and dare I say, if they're in Florida, CLT as well. They can match them more easily by doing a different calculation. So there've always been some folks that do different calculations, and to your point, that's going to continue.
Which is just to say, make sure you ask these questions to the schools themselves because they're the ones, they make their own policies, and you got to ask.
Yeah.
Also, some people have asked, can you drop ACT science on test day? So I do not know that.
Great question. You can't exclude yourself from being, having that paper, having that delivered to you in the order that's going to be had. But like always, you can choose not to answer a section. A student can choose not to answer a section and do that, but once you are registered for something, you need to, you will be put into that chair that has that presented to you, and going from there. Particularly if you're doing writing as well, if you try to drop science, that would become very difficult, because obviously writing is part of that. So you do kind of need to do what you're registered for. You do obviously have a right to not score a section, and that then won't be scored, but we wouldn't advise that. That wouldn't be good advice. Now, the one thing I do want to say, unlike writing, there are no exclusive chairs for with or without science. So you remember we used to have a separate room with writing, and then that's not happening anymore. We've changed our operational delivery so that we don't have to have so many rooms. Otherwise, we'd have had to have 8 rooms per test center as a minimum, with extra time and non-extra time, and with or without writing, with or without science, etc. And that obviously wasn't realistic. So we've changed slightly the way in which we deliver the test, and those of you that would have had a September test would have seen that. So it's kind of easier to do, but we would still recommend not doing that. It's gonna, that is still leaving the test before you are supposed to leave, and as you know, that becomes an incident in our test center if you do that.
Here, we'll just try to answer two more and then we'll close
Of course.
on a little late here. Some people have asked about equating dates. So yeah, so for those of you who don't know what that is, on certain dates of the year, yeah, no, probably Andy can speak more to this. On certain dates of the year, the test scores do take a little bit longer to come back
They
because
do.
there's more analysis being done on that data, new test forms, and so those are called equating dates when scales are basically created from those tests. I believe
Right.
this past weekend was an equating date for September since there was a longer
Absolutely.
period, and also I think there were like 7 different forms of the exam that were given out this past weekend, maybe more. Am I wrong on
I I'm not going to comment on how many of those were given out. But you're
that?
not
Okay.
wrong.
Uh, but so some people did note that normally there's one equating date per year, maybe two. It does look like on
Three.
that there's three this time, right? So it looked like I think
Yeah.
September is one of them. I think December is one of them,
And
and
February, I think.
February, right? Because it can't
Yeah,
be for April and June; those are MAK
that's
dates.
right. Yeah,
Um,
April and June can't happen, nor can October,
okay,
because they're my
forms
answer
are
key.
getting released.
So the other one. So right now we're planning to do equating on all three. It's a new test. It's a new blueprint. We need just a little bit more data. So we are planning to have equating on all three of those events. Eventually, we'll actually be able to get rid of equating altogether once we've built enough of those items that we're seeding throughout it. Those field test items, eventually we'll be able to do something called pre-equating, and we won't need to ever do equating again. But as you can imagine, we need to build up that bank of equated test items, and we don't have that fully built up yet. But eventually, that's one of the great things about the new blueprint. We'll be able to get scores out quicker because we'll have less equating, and of course, digital scores will go out quicker eventually as well. To give you an idea, we went to all digital for our international students in 2016, quite some time ago. And on average, we get results out to students internationally, as long as they're not, a special testing student, in under a week. So
Too busy.
that's a vet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very
that's a
true.
vet, that's our aim to eventually do that for domestic students too.
And I'll just include one other question. This is something someone asked me by email, but for the MAK exams, they just wanted to confirm whether or not the field test questions will be included or not, and also like, would there be a replacement for them, or are those questions just missing from the score?
They will not be included. There will be a standard replacement. So
Okay.
you'll be able to see the position they were in, because you'll be like, what's that? And you'll see on the scoring that it wasn't scored, but it won't be that question, because obviously we're going to be using those questions for other things, and so on and
And the
so forth.
question also is there going to be some kind of like replacement question there, or it's just going to be blank?
I believe it's going to be blank, but I will triple check on that, Ethan.
Okay, perfect. And then I know some people asked about test prep. So if you're interested in doing test prep with me, of course, you can reach out. You can reach out to me at info@collegians.com. I will send that also to all of the attendees. So if you're interested in speaking further about that, working with me or working with one of my colleagues, happy to help you out with that, of course. Thank you so much to everyone for attending today. I think this was really, really great. Thank you, Andy, for joining us so bright and early, and also for staying late
Pleasure.
with us. Really, we really do appreciate it. This was super duper helpful. I will be sending the slides to everyone who attended this meeting. So if you have any further questions, you can consult those, or of course, you can reach out to me by email. All right, you guys take care.
Have a great day. Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye bye, everyone.